Jim, we're back, and we're going to talk some more about Bernanke's presentation and his responses to Ron Paul's questions. I'd like you to explain a little bit more to the folks out there who may not understand about M3 and how they manipulate the consumer price index, because I keep seeing these comments on blogs and in articles criticizing Ron Paul for claiming that there's inflation because they say that inflation's at 2.5%. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I would like to know where the people shop who say that inflation is 2.5%, because the price of everything is going up, Jerry. No matter what you look at, if you look at entertainment or education or health care, gasoline, utilities, insurance, everything is going up. And so people who say that inflation is 2.5% just aren't with it. Now, the government says that, but the government, we know, is lying to us. The government, they used to acknowledge that they hedonically adjust prices. They used to be on their website, the Bureau of the Labor Statistics. They would hedonically adjust things.
What does that mean?
You know what hedonism is. I mean, hedonism is when they're trying to show us a good time. So they're manipulating the numbers and misleading us, but more and more people are catching on that inflation is not 2.5%. I mean, inflation is going through the roof, despite what the government says.
Well, let's end the segment talking about your new book, A Bull in China, Investing Profitably in the World's Greatest Market. And that's what you've been doing, isn't it? Investing profitably in China?
I do have investments in China. I've had them for a long, long time. And I can not buying Chinese shares right now because the market's gone through the roof. But my book is not a book of hot tips. It's a book about what's going on in China if you want to invest in China. There are various ways to do it: real estate, the currency, stocks. One of the best ways, of course, is to buy commodities, because the Chinese have to buy commodities, and they're going to buy more commodities. So there are plenty of ways to invest in China. I do a few case studies of a few industries to help people figure out what's going on. And then if people decide they want to invest in China, I've given them some ways to do it.
Well, and let's talk about commodity investing, because I believe that I've read that you are saying that the stock market in the United States is not going to come back for quite a long time, and we're in for a rough ride, and you recommend at this point investing in commodities. Is that right?
Well, I'd rather be in commodities than in stocks. I do own stocks in America. I mean, I've had some things I've owned for 20 or 30 years. I don't sell them just because the market may or may not go down for a while. But I think that the best place where people should have money now is either in sound foreign currencies or in real assets, such as commodities. I've been buying more agricultural commodities recently because I think that's a better place for people to have money than in stocks. I mean, certainly better than investment banks on Wall Street, which I've sold short.
Well, what is it about agriculture that you think is a good place to be? I mean, one thing that I've been reading is that there's less farmland in the United States, and perhaps that's true throughout the world, but why agriculture?
Well, the number of acres devoted to wheat farming has been declining for 30 years. The inventories of food are the lowest levels they've been since 1972. There are a lot of positive things taking place in the United States, in the world, positive for agriculture. Less and less land is available for growing crops, and now, of course, we have ethanol and biofuels, and because of biofuels, more and more agricultural products will be burned in gas tanks. So you're going to have greater demand for agriculture and less supply, and that normally means a bull market when supply is going down and demand is going up.
And do you also ascribe to the peak oil theory, or are you in oil, investing in oil as well, because of the possibility that the peak oil theory is correct?
Well, I have, in my last book, Hot Commodities, I talked about the oil and what's happening with oil. Jerry, I have no way of knowing if there's peak oil out there or not. I'm not a geologist, and even if I were, how could I have covered the whole world looking to see if there's any possible oil? But I do know that nobody has discovered a gigantic elephant oil field in over 40 years. I do know that every oil company in the world has declining reserves. I do know that nearly every oil country in the world has declining reserves. So maybe there's gigantic amounts of oil left out there, but if so, we don't know where it is, and we've got to find it very quickly and in very accessible areas, where the surprise is going to be how high the price of oil stays and how high it goes. Maybe there's billions and billions of barrels of oil left, but we don't know where they are.
Well, I'll tell you, my father's a retired petroleum engineer, and he he strongly believed in the Hubbert's peak and peak oil. So you might be on something there.
So far, the evidence is that he's correct, but it really doesn't matter, Jerry, unless somebody finds out. Let's say it's there. Where is it? We got to find it very quickly. And if we don't, the price of oil is going to continue to go higher.
Exactly.
But so far, your father and King Hubbert have been completely correct.
Yeah. Well, another thing I want to talk to you about is China, because, as you know, there are social conservatives in our country that don't want to have trade with China because they perceive China as communist and godless and immoral. What have you observed about China since you've actually been there and have seen the markets opening up? What do you think about the level of freedom and modernization in China?
Sure, they call themselves communists, but I'm telling you, they're among the best capitalists in the world right now. Massachusetts is more communist than China is. I mean, you try to do business in Massachusetts, try to do business in China. I promise you, most people would accept China. You will also find that there are lots and lots of rights now. I mean, there are hundreds of magazines and newspapers in China. 30 years ago, of course, when the hardline communists were running it, there was only one newspaper. There are lots of TV stations now, the Internet. There are tens of millions, scores of millions of people in China on the Internet now. I mean, it's virtually impossible to censor people, even if you want to. There is some attempt at censorship, of course, but I've driven across China a few times. The churches, the mosques, the temples are all packed with people now. They certainly aren't godless. Maybe they were godless officially 40 years ago, but they're not anymore. No, there are dramatic and massive changes taking place in China. Are there problems? Of course. There are and will be huge problems, just as there were in America 150 years ago, 125 years ago. We had terrible problems and horrible setbacks, but we did a pretty good job, and they're in the process of doing a pretty good job.
Well, Jim Rogers, I really want to thank you for being with me for this interview. It's very interesting, and I'm going to recommend that everybody go buy your new book, A Bull in China, Investing Profitably in the World's Greatest Market. Thank you very much for being with me.
Very good. Thank you, Jerry.